Well, I really have slowed down a lot. But age does take its toll on you. Growing up in Mobile, every week in our house, you would hear somebody say, let's go to Fairhope. So we'd be hitting the road to Fairhope. Coming to Fairhope at that time was a lot different than now because it was only the old highway. And I was always fascinated because when you come on the old highway in Daphne, right when you get on the highway, about, I guess a fourth of a mile up, my daddy would always say, see, there's the grave right over there. Show it to me every time we come here. Have you ever seen the grave? It's right on the highway, and it's built up brick about this high. It's got a marble slab on the top of it. We'd get out and look at the grave, but it's right on the highway. You can't miss it. And then we'd come on up the highway, and then right at the end of the highway, where the Episcopal Church is now, was a huge billboard that had a big black and white cow and the tail waved just like this the whole time. And it was it Woodhaven Dairy, one of the dairies here that had that. But Fairhope, beginning with my idea of Fairhope, I was always fascinated because the lifestyle here was so different than what we had in Mobile. So many people, so much traffic, and I went to Woodcock grade school, and then I went to Barton Academy, then I graduated from Murphy, and when I graduated from Murphy, it was a big shock to me going to college and being in such a smaller environment. So after Marianne and I married, I was teaching school in Mobile, and it was very hard at that time to make a living with the husband only teaching school, and Marianne was a stay-home mom. And I think the only thing Marianne ever contributed money-wise buying to our household was she had had a job working as a secretary for someone in Mobile at an insurance office, and she had saved, I don't know, $300. Then we went to Gaffer's and bought a couch and 2 chairs, and we still have the couch. But anyway, I always was infatuated with the single tax aspect of the theory of single taxation, and I used to read about it. I didn't take the course until not too long ago, maybe a year and a half ago, but I've always been a staunch supporter of Fairhope. My Aunt Hazel Stapleton owned Stapleton Florist, and one day she asked me, when I was out of school for the summer, I used to be the activities director for the city of Chickasaw because K.J. Clark was in Chickasaw and I knew Mayor Davis and his wife. So he would hire me as activities director. Well, I did that 2 summers, but I was still commuting back and forth to Mobile. At that time, there was only the causeway. Sometimes you'd get flooded out. The causeway would be run over with water. So she asked me, she said, why don't you come over here this summer? I'll pay you as much to help with the books as you make at Chickasaw. I said, okay. So I commuted back and forth for a summer, and then I said to Marianne, I really want to move over the bay. Well, Marianne was very much opposed to it, and she said, you know, I don't think I could live in that town. I just don't think I could. She's from Long Island, New York, so it was quite a cultural shock for her to come to a town like this that had, I think, maybe 1 filling station at the time. Anyway, we moved in a house that my aunt owned on Stimson Avenue, which is right behind the post office, and she charged us $75 a month rent, and I thought it was just heaven. I loved it. Marianne cried for 1 solid year, and because she was left here with Jonathan, no car, and walking around town. Well, it didn't take but just about 6-8 months of that year for her to be acquainted with so many people at St. Lawrence Catholic Church where we belong. And then the Fairhope Club asked her to become a member. Are you familiar with what the Fairhope Club is? Does anyone know that? In Fairhope, there was no junior league. So a bunch of ladies that were in Fairhope decided to start their own social club. So they put FA for Fairhope and Hera for women, which is Greek. So it became the Fairhope Club, which is still an active club today. The Fairhope Club is one of the clubs that is responsible for starting the Grand Summer Ball for the Grand Hotel, for the Fairhope Hospital Foundation. They turned the Summer Ball over to the Hospital Foundation. It's probably been about maybe 10 years ago that happened, but it was turned to be very successful. Getting away from the arts in Fairhope. I remember this lady, Miss Bergland. I don't know if anybody knew her or not, but she was Ms. Levine Bergland Sr. And the Big Head Gully, are you familiar with that? That's at the gully down by the bay. It's behind those apartments that are down there, those stucco two-story apartments, the last building on Fairhope Avenue. As you go toward the pier, there's a big gully there. It's all grown over now with kudzu, but at that time it had red clay walls, and they made a little stage outfit down in there, and they would have Shakespearean plays and dress in Shakespearean costumes, and that was probably in the 20s and 30s, I would guess to say. And one of the Berglands were the first people to have an automobile in Fairhope, and that's a single tax colony at that time, paid for your automobile tax, whatever paid you for taxes, whatever have you, your fishing tax, your hunting tax. But anyway, the arts in Fairhope was always a dominant character in Fairhope's personality. The organic school emphasized that, and Marietta Johnson created the idea of organic education, which is very, very exciting to learn about. The students learn on their own capability, I believe. Isn't that correct, Donnie? And they teach they even made their class rings. My Aunt Hazel Stapleton graduated from there, making her class ring. And they had various social activities, the maypole dancing, and so many dedicated Fairhope families would send their children there. And it had academically a very, very high rating. I remember when I was in high school, there was an entire article, I wish I could find it again, on the organic school in Fairhope, saying how advanced it was in the teaching and in the education process of the children, not just learning math and what have you, but learning about life itself. So that too itself was an art form. The theater, I had this note here. I remember saying to my parents, let's go to Fairhope. Well, they love to come every Friday or Saturday night over here, because a group of their friends, they would all get together with family and friends at the casino, which was on the wharf, the pier down there. Second floor of it wasn't a gambling casino. It was an entertaining casino. The second floor was nothing but a dance hall with a stage, and they would have bands and orchestras, and they would dance. Well, down on the beach area, about now, where if you drove down the pier, and you to the left, there's where they've beautified that area with shrubs and the walkway. There was an outdoor theater there that had a wooden wall built around it. And the floor was sand, had benches on it, and had a popcorn machine, had a gate. And you would go up to the gate and pay your fee and then get some popcorn and go in there and sit and look at the movie. And it was all outdoor. You could see the stars, and I mean, it was a lot of fun. And then usually when we got through with the movie, we'd go over there, and there was an ice cream, it wasn't really a parlor, it was an ice cream booth where they sold ice cream, and there were bathhouses there where you could change your bathing suit, and then bathrooms and what have you. And the downstairs of the casino you could eat was a restaurant. And we always looked forward to that maybe once or twice a month, coming over here and enjoying that, because there was something. The only other theater I've ever been to that was as different as that one was one not in Carrollton, but in East Point, Georgia, where my great-grandmother lived. She lived near what is now the airport. Well, they took over everything, but at that time, the airport was still there, but it was small. And they had a theater that was 2 blocks from my great-grandmother's house, and the theater was underground. The box office was on top of the ground, and you paid, and then you walked downstairs into the theater, so the airplanes couldn't make too much noise that you couldn't hear the theater. But the theater on the beach was really wonderful. We'd go over there and get ice cream. And speaking of lifestyles, though, people bring to my mind what Fairhope offered residents as the village on the bay as the businesses grew. there were businesses here, such as the Pine Quat Shop and the Pottery. It was the Pinewood, yeah, Pottery Shop. That was located right where I believe Miles Jones' office is now, the Pottery, across the street.
Where the art center is.
Oh, where the art center is. I knew it was somewhere around there. But anyway, it was wonderful. I remember Weta Bergland was telling me one day she went into one of the stores to buy something, and she said she was going to get 4 or 5, maybe 6 handkerchiefs for Levine for his Christmas or birthday. And she said the lady working in there started crying. And she said, well, why are you crying? And she said, because that's the last 6 handkerchiefs we have, and I won't have anybody to sell to anybody else, because she bought all of them. Rita was something else, though, when it comes to telling lists. I was thinking about a list of the businesses that were here in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, the times I remember so well. And I remember the Better Burger. The Better Burger was right where the Ben's Barbecue is, and then the A&W Root Beer stand was on the corner where Walgreens is. The Busy Bee service station was across the street from the A&W Root Beer stand, and I remember they put curtains. It was a filling station, and they put glass all the way to the floor, and they put curtains up around the thing about this high up. So I said to somebody one time, why did they put those curtains up in there? Well, they had a bar room in there, and they sold beer, and they didn't want people seeing anybody drinking beer in the filling station from Greeno Road. And the potato shed was on Greeno and Fairhope Avenue. It was right like in the middle of the parking lot of where Piggly Wiggly is now. That was part of the Carty Farms. I believe that was the Carty Farms. And they used to bring the potatoes there to sort them out, and then they'd hire a lot of migrant workers, or local people did that too, sorting the potatoes in the grades. Walker's 5 and 10 cent store was downtown, right about where Christine Linson's is right now, the artist. And I remember going in there, and Bobby Thomas, a realtor, was here, that lived here, was in front of me, and I knew Bobby real well. And so I go in there, and Mr. Walker, who was really not one of the kindest people that anybody ever knew, he really didn't have the personality to deal with people in a store, we'll say. His wife was very lovely, but he had a disposition that didn't make you feel real welcome. So I go in there to buy some stuff, and so I said, do you take checks? And he said, yes. And he said, whose boy are you? Because he saw my name was Nelson. So I told him, and he said, is this check any good? And I said, well, I'm sure it is. And Bobby Thomas said, well, if it isn't, I'll cover it if it comes back, because he didn't trust anybody. And I remember he fell off the ladder one time and broke his leg, and everybody would go in there and ask him how he felt, because they didn't really want him to get any better, because he was so mean anyway. One of the major changes in Fairhope that really has taken an abrupt change was the Arts and Crafts Festival. When the Arts and Crafts Festival started, are you all familiar with the Arts and Crafts Festival? Do you know anything about the history of it? When the Arts and Crafts Festival started, it was nothing to what it is now. It started out as a display of arts and crafts and collections. And people such as Craig Shelton would sit in the window at the hardware store, which was located at that time where Fantasy Island Toys is. You can look on that building, it'll say hardware. But he sat in the window there, and he would carve on his wood carvings, and people would walk down the street and stand there and look at him carving. And there would be another person in another window that would be painting. There would be people working with textiles. Then there was a lady that collected cobalt glass, and she must have had 100, 150 pieces of cobalt glass in different things, pitchers, glasses, insulators for electrical poles, and she would have all of that displayed. I remember in Cocky Jewelers, there was a lady that always displayed her craft, and what she did was she carved heads, feet, and hands out of ivory soap, and then she would make the dolls out of cloth and the dresses, and then she would attach the ivory soap head, hands, and feet to the doll and put them on a stand where you could see them standing. And she must have had 25 or 30. Do you remember that, Lottie, those dolls that she carved? And she was just a little old lady that just wanted to have a hobby. But in Fairhope, there has always been a multitude of talented people. Our neighbor next door, Miss Ness, used to make these baskets and trays, I mean, anything, and they're made out of pine needles. And she would collect the pine needles and then sew them together with raffia. And she would sit over there for hours, and I'd go over there and look at her doing it, and I just thought, you know, I just couldn't believe she's making that. And then she would varnish them and what have you, and she would have collections of those up there. I remember one year at the silver market, asked me, I had helped her several times, P.J. McAleer. And we had a collection of several wedding gowns. It was Marianne's grandmother's, her aunt's, and she had asked me to display those in her window. She was on Section Street, where I guess there's right behind the men's clothing store, and we did the displays there, and that was part of it. But and it lasted for one full week, and people would walk around, and that lasted quite a few years. But as the years developed, they started having invitations to artists that people knew, that people that lived here that knew an artist that lived there, that knew an artist that lived, and they started gaining some interest in coming to the show. So they moved it out of the windows and onto the streets, but it was done on a very, very small scale. And the food vendors that were allowed were only food vendors that were nonprofits, such as the high school band, the Girl Scouts, the Cub Scouts. No profitable organization or business could operate a food vending business. It was all a community-supported affair. But as you can tell, as time has come, it has become really an enormous thing, not only in size, but in money also. And when the Chamber of Commerce, when I was with the Chamber of Commerce, I was in the office on Section Street where Bloxham Building is, next to where the Courier used to be, that's a bank now. But it was all operated by volunteers, and I believe it still is. But it's done out of the operation from the Chamber of Commerce office at Spanish Fort. I believe that's Spanish Fort or Lake Forest. It used to be the Welcome Center, but I don't know what it is now. And Christmas in Fairhope was quite different. Donnie and Ronnie and several people used to make Christmas cards that were, how big were they, Donnie?
4 by 8.
Huge, hand-painted cards that hung from the poles. They were really, really wonderful and big, and didn't have any lights like we have now. Christmas caroling, and the Fairhope Garden Club used to have a door decorating contest where people would decorate their front doors for Christmas, and then they'd get a committee up and go around and judge the doors and to see who was creative enough, themes, and all these different things. And so that was, and then a Christmas parade, not like it is today, but very small, handmade. So most of them had magnolia leaves on them. They had anything you can think of that was really natural, nothing like it is now. And it was a daytime parade, like most all of that used to be. So many things have changed in Fairhope, and people ask me from time to time, since I have been here quite a while, on and off growing up and then moving here 50 years ago, what is the difference now between Fairhope then and Fairhope now? Fairhope then was a place where you really knew everybody. I would say you would know most everybody. You would not only had a doctor, but the doctor would be your friend, and you'd see him at a party. And it was a lifestyle that really was an art within itself. People were not busy rushing around. You had time to enjoy not only your friends, but the time that you had to create anything, to do anything, to enjoy the bay. And it was really an artful time that made a difference in your life. Today, I think we rush and rush and rush, and we don't have the value toward people. We don't have the value toward arts. We don't have the value to the lifestyle that we really should be able to enjoy. Although Fairhope is still a wonderful place to live, it does offer now, I always tell people, you don't have to go out of the city to buy anything that you want. You used to have to do that, but now you can buy anything you need right here. You have your choice of any kind of doctors, a hospital that is just far superior. And I remember when my son Jonathan was born, my daughter Regina was born at Thomas Hospital, I took Jonathan over there to see his mama, and they wouldn't let him in the hospital, and I had to stand him on the ledge of the window outside of her room so he could wave to her, and she was in the bed, but they wouldn't let you in there. But I remember when Regina was born also, I went to the hospital to wait for Regina, and LaVisha Fillingham was the head of nursing there. And I was sitting out there like everybody else in the lobby smoking cigarettes and waiting for them to tell me. So LaVisha comes up to me and she said, "You know what? I think this is ridiculous. You're sitting out here waiting for Mary Ann to have a baby, and she's the one that's going through it, and you're the one acting like you're nervous and carrying on." She said, "They're showing a film right in there of somebody having a baby." So I opened this door, and there was a room, probably as many people in here in that room, smoking and what have you. And that doctor's delivering that baby and throws that thing up, and I said, "Oh, God, I'm out of here. That's why the doctor's here. I don't want to experience all that." And so I went outside and slid down the wall and sat on the floor for a little while until I pulled myself back together. But anyway, just like knowing LaVisha Fillingham, knowing all the different people here, and my connection with Fairhope has been a really wonderful experience. And do you have any questions so far of anything I've mentioned or said?
How did you get in the deli business?
Well, we got in the deli business because I was with the chamber at that time. Jonathan and Regina were getting older. And Mary Ann said, "You know, I'm tired of sitting at home all the time. I want to do something." And I said, "Go to the bank and ask George Dyson, give you a job as a part-time teller, and you'd be home." And, "Oh, I don't want to do that." So she said one day, "You know what? I really do want to cook. So why don't we open a deli?" So we rented the building where Mr. Jean's Beans is. And we were paying $350 a month rent. The people that owned it lived in Virginia. And so we got our friends together, and Mary Ann's always been a cook. She's from an Italian family, can cook anything, and it's wonderful. She got all of her friends together to help her and started this business. Went to Atlanta and got some merchandise to put in it. And Louise Growell was going to be the bookkeeper. So the first day we opened up, I was at the chamber office and went over there about 4 o'clock. And I said, "How'd we do today?" And Louise Growell said, "I would never have believed it in a million years." She said, "Your rent's $350 a month, and you did $385 today." And I said, "Oh, that's a wonderful sign. We made the rent in one day's work," and it just took off. It was the only deli in Fairhope. Andres was in Daphne and moved up here about probably 2 years after we opened up. And then later on, we bought the business on the corner, and we sold that business 10 years ago. But Fairhope is truly a wonderful place. I would tell you this, it has gotten to be really a mecca for shopping. You can buy some of the most expensive women's clothes. You could go anywhere. some of the most expensive men's clothes that you could buy anywhere. Sometimes I'll go in there and look for something on sale and get it and have a good buy. But, I couldn't spend $1,200 for a sport coat or $800. But anyway, it has become a mecca. There were two drugstores, Fairhope Pharmacy and Holland Pharmacy. Holland Pharmacy was owned by Mr. Duke, and it was where Brenny's jewelry store is. Has the tall mansard roof on it. And he was there. He was a great guy, too. But it has gotten to be where it is so busy downtown. It's unbelievable. It's amazing the people that work in town, and I live right downtown on Delamar. It's amazing to see the people that work in town that park on the street rather than the automobile hotel. And they should utilize that and leave the other for customer parking rather than utilizing space all day long where they're working. This is a painting here done by Christine Linson that is the Tomato Lady. Did anybody ever know Barbara Davis? She used to be on the corner across from next door to Fairhope Hardware, where that big painting is on the side of the wall. And I used to go up there 2 or 3 times a week and buy cases of tomatoes for the deli. And then Christine Linson painted this, and I saw it, and I thought, I just have to have that painting. And so I'm giving that tonight to the Fairhope Museum, to Donnie tonight for the Fairhope Museum, because I think there's probably, I hate to say this, but I think it's probably the last very special thing that Fairhope had that most other places don't have that we know of. Somebody selling tomatoes, potatoes, onions, bell peppers, sweet potatoes, rutabagas on the corner in town. And we have really missed seeing her and having her around. She sold her business to a man after she had so much difficulty with her knees, and she had knee surgery, and she just had a terrible time. She sold her business to a gentleman that tried it for about a month and 2 months, and it wasn't his cup of tea. But it was something that we really didn't miss. Do you have any other questions? Yes, ma'am?
Were you involved with Theater 98, and what is its history?
No, I was not involved with that. I wasn't. I used to go to all the plays, but I was not involved. Growing up, I was involved in a theater in Mobile, the Jefferson Players, but that was only for a short time. That building where the Theater 98 is was the first Baptist church of Fairhope. The first, when it was built, it was the first Baptist church. Donnie, can you think of anything I've missed?
You covered everything pretty good.
I was interested in the history of your house,
Oh, my house?
and how long it's been there, because it's such a stately house in the middle of the
Well, I tell you how that house came about. We lived 25 years on Fairwood Boulevard, where I loved. I loved where I lived. And then one day, my children had gone away, and were not coming back home. And where my house was a car wash. And you would drive in where the house is and had those blinking lights, the green and the yellow and the red, that you could go through the car wash, and it would come on and wash your car, and then you drive straight through, and when you went straight through, it curves back and you go down the driveway out on Church Street. And when you drove through the car wash, there were attendants there that did your wheels and your windshield and all that. One day somebody drove through there, and instead of turning, they drove straight through the back of Mr. Haygood's photography shop, and that was the back room was his bedroom, and just demolished his bedroom. But anyway, one day we were coming home from Mass, and Mary Ann said, we drove around the corner, and she said, why don't you tear the car wash down and build a townhouse? And so that's been 20 years ago, almost 22 years ago, that we started building that house. And it's for sale now because we need to size down. I can't change light bulbs in a 12-foot ceiling, and it's hard to find anybody to come in to do that kind of work. So we're hoping that the people that have offered to own our house We are hoping that they take it, and I'm sure it'll become some kind of commercial business. But it's wonderful living in town. I love to walk to Greer's. I mean, you can walk anywhere, and that is a wonderful part of being right downtown. The changing of Delamar to a one-way street has just been remarkable. It's wonderful. The parking has increased. The people do not speed down the street like they used to, and it has been a remarkable change. At first, people were upset about it, but it has been a really, really positive thing. Thank you for asking me, and I hope I've included enough that you could walk.
When you first started speaking, you mentioned seeing a grave that your father would show you. I didn't quite catch where that was.
Now, when you come on the old highway, Highway 98, when you get off of the Greeno Road of the 4-lane, when you come off of that, it's not even maybe a half a mile, and on the right-hand side, left-hand side of the highway, right on the highway, is a grave. Is a grave that is as wide as a grave, and it's about this high, and it's all solid brick. And you can get out, and the marble slab is on the top and tells you the name, the date, and everything of the person buried in there.
Is it still there?
Mm-hmm. It's still there. And that always fascinated me coming over here. Have you seen it?
I don't know where that's at.
Yeah, you do.
I know everything, and I don't know where that's at.
It's right there in front of a house. I don't know, but it has been there so long, and I imagine it was there before you couldn't bury people there, because the Daphne Cemetery is not too far from there. It's in Daphne. No, an old scenic highway. If you're going toward that Daphne, it's right there on the street.
Tell us the Audrey Stapleton story.
Oh, my cousin. Wesley Stapleton's my first cousin. He had a sister named Audrey Stapleton. And Audrey somehow or another developed spinal meningitis. And so there was not a facility here that could handle that type of problem. So they had to take Audrey to Mobile. And so at that time, I'm trying to think of when Audrey died. She died before I was born. I guess maybe she died in 38, we'll say. And so Audrey was in the hospital, and it was her birthday. And my aunt had called over there. They said she was just doing perfectly fine, that she was going to be released from the hospital. So Aunt Hazel and Uncle Arthur got in the car, went over to the hospital, and when they got there, she was dead. She had had an attack, and spinal meningitis, I don't know if it does now, but it draws you back, draws you in a curve like this where your spine goes back, and she was dead. Well, of course, they just about she almost had a nervous breakdown. Anyway, she left. They buried Audrey. They closed the whole town down. They had to fumigate all the buses. They had the schools, because that's a highly contagious disease at that time. And anyway, Audrey was buried in the Colony Cemetery, and for many, many years, there was a huge canopy over the grave that was made of copper and wood that my uncle, her daddy, built. And it was always fascinating, because about once a month we'd have to go to Audrey's grave, and Aunt Hazel had closed her room off at the house. They lived out on 104, and she closed the entire room off and sealed it, and never went in that room from the time Audrey died until probably 1980, probably. Yeah, probably in 1980. And they finally tore the wall down and included it in the room that it was connected to. But that was, and she still had every one of Audrey's birthday presents in a in a cedar chest, and about once every 6 months she'd pull everything out and make you look at it. It was really a crazy thing, but I couldn't imagine having someone die on their 16th birthday either. That would be a horrible thing to endure. But Hazel left the house out at the farm, and she came down and lived with Adelia Bancroft on Stimson Avenue, where she could walk 2 blocks to the cemetery every day. But she recovered, and she went through all of it, and it was a situation, though, that was very unusual to anybody's family.
You mentioned all the odd things in Fairhope. You mentioned the Better Burger. Do you remember its whole name? It was Better Burger number 2.
Oh, was it?
And the secret was always, where was number 1?
Yeah. I always love to go to the place where the Lewis building is. Lulu's and Me is in there now. It's got a plaque out there, the Lewis building. And they used to serve hamburgers in there, and there was a pool table in the back. And there was a lady that cooked in there, and she wore house shoes all the time, pink slippers. And one day I was in there talking to her, and I can't remember her name. I think her name was Inez. And I said, Inez, do you have another job other than working here? Because you're not here all the time. She said, I roof houses. I said, you what? She said, I roof houses. I said, do you really? And she said, yeah, that's my other job. And I thought, somebody as little as she was roofing houses. And I remember the Greyhound bus station, or the Trailways bus station, was over there on the corner where it was where Regions Bank is on Section Street. And they had the best oyster loaf. Miss Wallace worked in there, and food was so good. On the corner was a M&S filling station. That was you could go in there and charge your gas, and I mean, it was just wonderful. Before the filling station was there was a home there where the Pilchers lived, Pilcher. And Mrs. Pilcher, I think, is the one that wrote the Fairhope song. Isn't that correct? And I remember they were telling me one day, Aunt Hazel was telling me one day that they had a New Year's Eve party at the yacht club every year, and they all dressed up. And Mr. Pilcher was dressed up as the New Year's baby with the diaper and a big baby bottle. I'm sure it was full of whiskey. And when they came back from the party, she couldn't get him in the house, and he fell asleep on the front porch in the swing with that diaper and that New Year's Eve party on, with his big baby bottle laying on his stomach. And she said people were knocking on the door and said, you better get Mr. Pilcher in here. But Fairhope has had its characters. Berta Cordy lived over on 50 Church Street, where those buildings are now. Anybody remember her house? It was an Edwardian style 2-story house, stone and brick. Anyway, Berta had a monkey that she kept in her bathroom, over the bathtub. And one day she went in there, and she had help at the house. And one of them tried to put food in the monkey's cage, and the monkey got loose. And the people from Greer's called her and said, Miss Berta, your monkey's in the vegetable department down here. You're going to have to send somebody down there to get it. But there have been some characters here, hadn't it, Audrey? So many characters. Thank you for asking me to come, and I've really enjoyed it.